Now, here is Angela.
Thank you. Wow, to finally be standing here after years of dreaming about a show that will be a true representation of the Afrocentric zeitgeist is absolutely surreal. A big thank you to my studio audience. And to you at home, thank you for joining us. I'm yours truly, Angela Bamford. The ethos of this show is to present a multicultural and intricate approach to discussing topics that are otherwise considered taboo in these parts of the world. By limelighting these issues and bringing them to the fore, we create new thought-provoking and pertinent dialogue centered on unique African experiences. In this episode, we explore the feasibility of reparations. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Calculating the value of a life is complex, but as slavery has taught us, it's been done before. For centuries, Africans were reduced to property in North and South America and the Caribbean. Slave traders had no trouble pricing a human life, and abolition-era economists repaid slave owners for the losses they incurred. It is only when the descendants of those slaves return to ask for compensation for their lost ancestors does counting become difficult. Recently, Germany announced it would pay Namibia $1.3 billion spread over 3 decades for colonial-era genocide. There were other forms of slavery in Africa before the transatlantic slave trade, but that system of trade was modeled on a robust capitalist scheme, significantly propelling economies in the Americas, for example, into global economic powers. Is it time for reparations to be paid to people of African descent? My guest is Dharouba Bin Wahad. He's a Pan-Africanist, former Black Panther Party leader and a U.S. political prisoner. Welcome.
Thank you.
So today we're discussing reparations. Do you think Africans and people of African descent deserve reparations for slavery and colonialism?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your program. Well, first, I think we would have to try to define in some way what we mean by reparations. And I think that by reparations, we're not talking about an individual compensation for a wrong. Like, for instance, if a person is robbed and the criminal is taken to court and he is ordered to pay reparations or reconstitution of what he's stolen to the victim, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about reparations as a remedy, as a recompense for a wrong that was done to people over a period of time, to reconstitute these people, to reimburse people for these grievous wrongs. And I think that when we look at the African diaspora and the African continent, we're talking about reparations in different ways.
Okay.
For those states, those 53 or 54 countries that exist in Africa, I believe, and I think it's supported by the evidence, that it's impossible for these governments who were created basically by the European colonizers, who determined the borders, who determined the ethnic composition, the racial composition, the tribal composition of each entity that they once owned, that they once dominated, that they once controlled, and then call it a state is a contradiction, cannot be taken seriously. So African governments cannot pay reparations to African people because it wasn't African governments, the ones that post-colonial, that that instituted the inhumanities and injustices and atrocities on African people. It was the Europeans. It was the Europeans. It was the Christian church. It was the European nobility and Europe's business elite, their military. They were the ones that raped and pillaged Africa. And so they are the ones that should be held accountable and to which the petition for reparations should go. However, given the fractious nature of the African continent, given the divisions on the African continent, divisions that were created by the colonial powers, that were intentionally created by the colonial powers so that they could continue to extract the wealth of Africa and create national elites that depended on that wealth in order to stay in power, in order to stay in control, that given that type of disunity, that type of intentional disunity, because the African Union, as a friend of mine's pointed out, exists not to unify Africa, but to maintain this disunity, to maintain this dysfunction as a continent. That's his job, that's his purpose.
Now, if you see that then, how feasible are reparations for African continent countries?
It's not feasible. In that geopolitical context, it's not feasible. The only context in which reparations would be possible is if the African continent represented a political and economic whole, a political and economic bloc that demanded and spoke in one voice, in which case the power paradigm between Africa and Europe and the developed world would radically change.
So the key, I guess I should call it ingredient, is
power.
Power and unity though.
Well,
right?
As Kwame Nkrumah once said, before Africa could experience or undergo economic unification and economic unity, it first must have political unity. And of course, we know that the intentions of the colonizers, that the intentions of the Europeans, the intentions of their institutions like the IMF, like the
WTO,
the WTO,
the EU,
and all of these institutions is not to facilitate the development of wealth and power in Africa, but to maintain it and manage it in a way that they could continue their dominance, that they could continue their exploitation.
So Dharouba, you're saying the agenda of the IMF, the WTO, the EU, what have you, is to continue the perpetration of suppression? Well,
I wouldn't put it that way. I mean, that's what it does for Africans, but it's meant to financially and economically control the wealth and trade of the planet, and to capitalize and hold the wealth that the Europeans in the West accrued from slavery, from imperialism, from colonialism, and from victory in the first two industrial wars. We really need to understand that the people in power today are not going to give up that power. They're not going to give it up under any circumstances. They will reform the periphery of that power, but they will do it in such a way that ensures that they control and maintain their power. And the only way to compensate for that, the only way to deal with that, is Africa has to become so powerful and so geopolitically unified that they can be dealt with then, as Africans can be dealt with from a position of strength and could demand justice.
Yeah.
You cannot beg for justice. You cannot beg for freedom from people who have a vested interest and a vested
in your suppression.
In maintaining you in that position. Of course, now we're not living in the 19th and 18th century, so we're horrified by certain inhumanities, by the slaughter and murder of people. We talk mightily about human rights all the time.
Okay, so if unity is the first place to start from, looking at the 54 countries, the kind of politics we practice on this continent, how, again, going back to feasibility, is it possible to even be united in the first place to then demand for these reparations?
Well, as again, I had a conversation this morning with a close friend of mine, Ghanaian.
Yeah.
And I had said this in the proactive way. I said that I used the idea that let's take something like healthcare. Let's take something like the well-being of ordinary African people. I said that the African Union does not have a Pan-African Refugee and Relief Agency. Mm-hmm. That whenever there's a tragedy or a horrific event, whether natural or unnatural, we don't have any Pan-African Red Cross or Red Crescent, or we don't have a Pan-African Doctors Without Borders. Mm-hmm. We don't have a Refugee and Relief Agency like the United Nations has, the UNHCR. Why doesn't the African Union have that? Yet and still the African Union has a united military council, where all of the military heads of all the African nations can then sit and talk about, peacekeeping and intervention here and intervention there.
Playing the devil's advocates, some would argue.
Don't do that. Just taking the devil has plenty of advocates. You don't need to be one. Just taking the contrary.
For the sake of the arguments, right? Let me play the devil's advocates, right? Some may argue that Ghana is a member of the UN. Nigeria is a member of the UN. A lot of the 54 countries on the continent are members of the UN. So why can we take relief from the UN if something bad were to happen? Well, what is wrong? What is wrong there?
Well, the United Nations was created after World War II in order to ensure that the victors in World War II would not have to undergo another horrendous global conflict like they did before. So the real power in the United Nations doesn't reside in the General Assembly. Yeah. It resides in the Security Council. And the Security Council is dominated by the 5 victors in World War II, the French, and they're permanent members. You can't remove these crackers from position of power. You see, they're permanent members. And it wasn't until the early 1960s, I believe, or the late 1950s, that China was even admitted to the United Nations Security Council. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until then. Up until that point, the Europeans who had created the United Nations with these glowing words of war no more and turning guns into plowshares, all of that stuff that they advocated. Since that time, millions of Africans have been murdered in wars. Millions of human beings have been displaced. Entire countries were invaded and occupied by European surrogates like the European settler state of Israel. We have a lot of things that has happened since the founding of the United Nations to show that the United Nations is not a vehicle for unity or change for the majority of humanity, but it exists as a rubber stamp and as a cover for the continued pillage of the world by Europeans and by the global powers that control the resources of Africa, the corporate powers that control the resources of Africa. So if we look to the United Nations to substitute for the actions or the policies of the AU, we're looking in the wrong place.
Well, picking back on the back of that, is it absolutely necessary that the enslaver compensates the enslaved? Should we move on and cease this conversation on reparations?
Well, I don't know how you move. History is the best subject to reward or research, but we are where we are today because of what happened yesterday.
Okay. And
if we don't learn from what happened yesterday, we're going to continue along these same lines and repeat it in the future.
So how do reparations come in there?
Well, reparations...
in making sure those atrocities are not repeated.
Well, the way you make sure that these atrocities are not repeated is that you hold those to account that committed them. You hold those to account that have benefited and profited from them. And until you hold those to account that have done that, they're going to continue to do it because they don't want to be held to account. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very simple. Whenever the United States talks about curbing terrorism or whatever, They'll go bomb another country. They'll go kill Muslims with a drone while they're praying in the masjid because they say that a value target is in the masjid. So all this collateral damage, we're sorry it happened. We'll give you a few bucks, and they'll keep it moving. What you have to understand is that these people in power, those people who use governments and repressive tools and military to terrorize their people, to beat them down and to keep them in poverty, are not individuals that are amenable to persuasion. The only thing that they understand is power. The only thing that they understand is a foot in their ass. Now, if you don't put your foot in their ass, if you don't do that, then you are letting them off the hook, and they're going to continue to do what they're going to continue to do.
All right, let's take some submissions from the streets of South Africa.
Yes, indeed, we do, but we need to look at slavery in context because, slavery really started 1652 with the Europeans landing here, where the people that were from here, your Esakwa, Kohokwa people, Goronaikwa people, which was Hottentot people from the Western Cape, were enslaved. So from there it moved on. So 400 years later, those people have still not had any reparation, as being Aborigines and African, you understand? So there's a lot of reparation that could be done and should be done because slavery has not even been addressed in South Africa yet.
Yes, they do, because I think at some point the reason why other people carry that mentality, white people owe them, is because of what they've done in the past. So for them being given reparations will actually remove that mindset and decrease hate in our country.
Do deserve reparations because most of our forefathers were taken abroad and they were being used to develop Europe, and yet Africa is underdeveloped.
I would say to a large extent. We were discussing the land issue not so long ago, and really, if something was violently taken from you, then if we don't have policy that allows you to take it back, then they should be then taken back violently. I wouldn't say that there are policies that need to be developed around that and reparations and stuff, but really, there is no humane way of reversing the effects of slavery. So if we are going to speak about it, then we need to be prepared for conversations around we're not going to follow policy, because when these things were taken, they were not taken under any kind of policy that actually benefited the people.
Some people think the call for reparations is holding us back and that we're using it as an excuse for the situation we find ourselves here on the continent. What do you have to say to that?
Well, that's a false proposition entirely. What's being said is, why would we think that if we draw the attention of the status quo, the people in status quo power, to how they got to power and how they maintain their power, that we draw their attention to that and we say, well, we no longer want to indulge in that, we no longer want to be victimized by that, so therefore we're moving in this direction, okay? Every leader on the African continent that talked about genuine independence and genuine freedom for their people without excluding the former imperial powers are dead, have been murdered. And only those that have been maintained in power, how are they maintained in power? By the endorsement of the French, by the endorsement of the British, by the endorsement of our former colonizers. And then we're told that if you go this way, then you're engaging in some type of dictatorial or autocratic avenue for success. We need to really understand that long before the Europeans were taking baths, long before they understood what personal hygiene meant.
Yes.
When they were being overrun by rats in London and the bubonic plague and all of that stuff in Europe, Africans in Africa had the glorious empires of Songhai, and Mali Congo, and all of these empires long before these Europeans came down the west coast of Africa looking for a trade route. Okay, so We need to understand that in our own culture, in our own history, resides our liberation. Amilcar Cabral, who was a brilliant son of Africa and led the struggle in Guinea-Bissau, Amilcar Cabral said that the European conquest of Africa interrupted the African historical continuum and made us a footnote to European history. In every historical book history book in Europe you go to, we're the footnote. You see, we're the, exception. We're in the index. We're not the main story. History is a word comprised of two words. His story. We haven't told our story yet because we haven't had the power to express ourselves as Africans, to liberate ourselves from the mantras of white supremacy and inferior self-hatred. I mean, if we look at the culture right here in Ghana, how many struggles have we gone through just about here? About African students going to, say, Archimoto School. And being told they had to cut their hair, they had to cut their dreadlocks. But yet and still, you have old, tired, fufu eating judges. Fufu belly eating judges. And I'm using that in an intentionally derogatory way.
Yeah.
Not to demean fufu because it's good food. But what I'm saying is these portly gentlemen, for the most part, they come into court wearing black robes like they're members of some demonic cult, with little wigs on their head, blonde wigs. These Africans with little blonde wigs on their head, and they sit down and they administer judgments and law based on the British model of judgments and law. So the wig on their heads is supposed to be symbolic of authority, of wisdom, and all of this stuff. But what is it a symbol of? It's a symbol that you have adopted the values and the standards of your former colonizer, and that those values and standards that reflect you as an African are somehow wrong. So you cut an African's child's head here and send them to a school of educated fools in uneducated schools. You send them to a school where they learn nothing.
Rhyme?
Well, I could be a rapper if I want to. but I'm not. But I'm just saying that, it's sad that our children are subjected to this, so that when they grow older and they become young women and they become young men, they think that African hair, the nappy hair, and that kinky hair is somehow unacceptable. It's unacceptable in the business place. It's unacceptable in institutions. If you're serious, you'll cut your dreadlocks. If you're serious, you'll clip your hair. And what? You see? So if we're serious, we should bleach our skin too.
Wow. That's a topic on this show that we're going to discuss.
Well, I'm just saying, we have not understood that the oppressor, the former colonizer, cannot keep us in this position unless they control our minds.
But then I think that goes back to the conversation on whitewashing history, right? His story, as you said, we haven't told our history yet. They are telling their story, their history. So then we are basically taking in what they're telling us and living by it. How can we change that? How can we revolutionize, and perhaps maybe radically? How can we tell our story?
Well, that's
especially if you take into account the way they still control Africa.
Well, we could talk about the educational system, the grassroots educational system that young people grow up with here in Ghana. I've been in Ghana since 1992 or thereabouts, and I think that I found that the educational system, when it comes to teaching Ghanaians about Africa and about themselves and their role that they should play in the development of Africa, that these curriculums are woefully inadequate, and I mean, in the Black Panther Party, for instance, one of the points we had in the 10-point program and platform was about education. And it said that we wanted an education that would empower us, that would teach us about our own identity, and that would show us how we could improve our lives. And I just want to end this particular thing with this thought. You know, Africa belongs to the young, to its youth. It belongs to its young people. Africa has the highest, the youngest population on the planet. The average age of Africans is between 25 and 28. Wow. 29, I mean, 25, 30. That's a very young population, okay? And so the future of Africa belongs to this generation. But the generation that's in power, you understand, they are not about to relinquish their power. They are not to create the type of environment that will empower young people, and they have no ideas on what to do to empower their people. And the young people have plenty of ideas, but no power. So the solution is that young people in Africa have to organize themselves, have to mobilize poor people in the communities where they are at to stand for those things that they need and must have as people. When we talk about Ghana, for instance, we could drive down the streets in Ghana and we could talk forever about how the roads are messed up. We could drive down some streets where the dust is going sky high and people are sitting on the side of the road trying to sell food, you know, and the road isn't paved. The road hasn't been paved for the past 30 years. But we've had how many administrations, how many governments, administrations that we've had here?
You know, Dharouba, then we go back to the conversation of power, because then these governments are telling us there's no money.
They're lying.
There's no money.
If there's no money,
there's no money.
If there's no money, why are they driving a Land Cruiser and a Pajero?
I mean,
if there's no money,
there's money for that.
How do you know that the U.S. has more money in its treasury than we do?
Well, it doesn't actually. It's just
you don't know that.
Yeah.
I mean, they've been printing dollars like it's going out of style.
Yeah.
You know, ever since the Bretton Woods Declaration, you know, they took the dollar off of the gold standard.
Yes.
Americans have been printing dollars whenever they needed it. So the dollar is actually worthless.
But, you know, because you keep talking about power, Dharouba, right? Power, unity, power. And going back to the conversation on reparations, if reparations are ever going to be, you know, feasible, we need to be united. We need to have power. So power. But then money is power, right? Having
when you mean money, you mean?
I mean, let's say if Ghana were to go to war with America, okay?
Why would Ghana do that?
I'm just saying, bear with me. I'm just saying, we need resources. We need certain resources. Because look, today, let's say a radical person in this country gets up and says, I am changing things, I'm doing that. The next thing you know, he's killed.
But who killed him?
The West, right? And they create.
What's the name of your airport? What's the name of your airport again?
Kotoka. Why?
What role did Kotoka play in the overthrow of Nkrumah and the overthrow of those in Ghana?
But it's going back to that conversation, forming proxy, you know, governments and powers. So that it's like we are continuously in a loop.
But I think you said something. But I don't think that we should look at Africa as a place that cannot defend itself, cannot exploit its own resources.
But realistically, can we?
Of course you can. Of course you can. But the first problem that you have is your own political elite. The first problem, you got to remember that although we're talking about things more or less along geopolitical and racial lines, we have a serious class problem, not only in the African diaspora, but right here in Ghana. You see? And let's take the example of Nigeria, for instance. People would say, well, Nigeria is one of the 10 largest oil-producing countries on the planet, and it's oil-rich. Nigeria is not oil-rich, it's oil-dependent. 85% of its economy is based on fossil fuel and oil. But none of that wealth trickles down to the people in Lagos and the people in the streets and the people in the villages, none of that wealth trickles down to them. Lights be off in Lagos just as much as they be on. But the lights don't go off in the rich part of town.
Mm-hmm.
The lights don't go off there. Mm-hmm. The lights don't go off in the U.S. Embassy. The lights don't go off at the radio station.
So you see, then it goes back to us using reparations as an excuse, right? Because if Nigeria has the oil deficits, right? Ghana has the gold deficits. Congo, what have you? Gabon, what have you, right? Why are we still in this situation? They can then say, you know what? You have all these deficits, mine them, and make your countries better.
Well, it's
why
a little...
Why do we then have to ask for reparations then? Because we can say that has happened.
But that, even if
That's
you
in the
did that,
past.
you still should ask for reparations.
Okay.
Okay, you know, everybody put the money in the bag. That's what the stick-up kid says the stick-up guy says when he walks in the bank. Everybody put your stuff on the floor and put the money in the bag. You don't say, okay, because you guys over here, you know, y'all don't work for the bank. Y'all okay. Everybody put their money in the bag.
But why is it important to ask for reparations?
You know why that's important?
Yeah.
That's important because we're not just talking about controlling our own resources, which we should of all. We're talking about combining those resources into a common market. That means that no European could come into Europe and buy bauxite from Guinea. They have to buy bauxite from the mineral consortium of all of the bauxite producing countries in Africa. So we'll set the price for bauxite. You don't want the bauxite? Forget your fighter airplane. You don't want the coltan? No more iPhone. Would you go come take it? Now you know, right? This ain't the turn of the 20th century. White folks ain't coming in Africa and taking nothing anymore. They're not going to do it. And this is why they got AFRICOM. So you do it to yourself. So they'll train you.
So wait, am I hear you say we're doing what is happening now? Africa is where it is now because of Africans.
Well,
is
yes,
that what you're saying?
Yes, but also because Africans refuse, the ones that are in power, refuse to change the paradigm of power and geopolitics to suit the African people, because they're gaining wealth, power, and influence, and they're kept in power by these forces, you see.
Okay. Bear with me, and I know this is a fool's dream, but if, let's say, we do get to a place where Europe and the Americas are ready to pay reparations, what form should reparations take?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to all of those things at the moment, but I would say, generally speaking, that reparations, as it would manifest itself to the African diaspora, would be very different than what reparations could be if there was a United States of Africa and they were holding the former imperial powers to account. You see, if we had that type of situation, reparations for Africa would be more functional in many ways, because we're assuming under that scenario that the leadership of this united Africa is about the empowerment of Africa and using the wealth of Africa to advance Africans. Okay, that's the assumption we could make. But in the United States, it's different, because in the United States, African people, descendants of Africans, are ambivalent about who they are as a mass. Some of us are struggling for better inclusion in the system, for more inclusion in the system. We want more opportunities to be equal opportunity exploiters. We want to exploit stuff just like white folks do. That's one thing. And then you have other Africans who's supposed to be woke, who's supposed to be conscious, who want reparations, who look at themselves as a people, and who look at themselves as a national entity. And they could be called nationalists, they could be called Pan-Africans. So with this type of division, it's easy for the United States or for the United States government to then divide us and encapsulate those ideas that could lead to unity, that could lead to political power. Now, you see, in the United States, in order for us to really deal with the question of power, we have to have our own political party. We have to have a political party that's not just based on us being black, but based also on the majority of people in the United States who are the victims of finance capitalism. The majority of people in the United States do not own their home, they rent. The majority of people, poor working people, get a salary.
Yeah.
The majority of poor working people don't have access to adequate health care. The majority of poor people don't have access to good schools. The majority of poor people in the United States live in substandard. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And until we have a political organization and a political party that represents this these masses of people genuinely, we cannot influence U.S. government policy, whether domestic or foreign.
But then again, if you look at the last election in the U.S.,
That's
the black population, you know,
did what?
held the power. They swayed the votes.
But who did they sway it to?
Well, okay.
They swayed it to an old, tired, wore out white man.
That's a conversation for another day.
I mean, he's about to drop dead at any moment. And then you have Kamala Harris step up. Now, who is she? She was a prosecutor in California, locking up black men and poor people. That was her job.
Yeah, but okay, well, we have to end the conversation, but I have to find out from you, what's the first step? I mean, if I hear you, right, African countries need to be united. Africans in the diaspora need to be united. They need to create their own political parties and organizations and associations to hold the power and hold the white man accountable. But what's the first step at this point, at this juncture?
The first point is resistance is organized. It's to organize ordinary people to resist the conditions that they're living in. Okay, how many years have I sat here in Accra and watched Asylum Downs flood every rainy season? Every rainy season, the drain looks like the Volta River. You see, and I mean, and how many times does the government get on the radio during the rainy season and say, "Don't clog the drains"? It's obvious that the clogged drains are clogged, first of all. Second of all, it's obvious that the draining system is inadequate. We're talking about infrastructure improvement. No money for infrastructure improvement, but you have money for the armed forces. You have money to carry out all of this pomp and circumstance of state.
Well, on that amazing note, organization, you said, right? Resistance.
People don't
organizing, protest, resist, right?
Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you very much, Dharouba Bin Wahad. He's a Pan-Africanist. He's a former U.S. political prisoner and also a former Black Panther party leader. It's imperative that we acknowledge the years of atrocities, trauma and pain that enslaved and colonized Africans went through. Beyond this, our ability to create meaningful generational wealth was curtailed. We're also removed from our culture, heritage, and values, our identity. We have yet to heal from those traumas as we're still dealing with the remnants of that inhumane treatment today. Today's conversation should keep in mind the trauma that we were dealt and are dealing with. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Coming up is Destination Africa, where we take you to beautiful places on the continent. Maha Beach Resort. Named after the local raffia used in its construction, is your quintessential beach resort. Upon arrival, you're immediately met with the best reception. Beautifully set on the piece of Ghana's 500-kilometer coast in the tribal community, Maha offers a blend of nature, tradition, and luxury. A boat ride to the Maha Island, where lunch, jet skiing, and a ride on the banana float are the order of the day. You'll be left perfectly exhausted for a well-deserved massage. If you fancy a hike, the Ankasa Conservation Rainforest presents the perfect scenery. Covering approximately 500 square kilometers, the tropical evergreen rainforest will envelop nature lovers and bird watchers. The rainforest is beautifully crisscrossed by the Ankasa, Nini, and Suhian rivers. A walk to the Bamboo Cathedral will leave you in awe of creation. If history is more your speed, a boat ride to the famed misty village of Nzulezu will transport you to a place of heritage. Overlooking Lake Tadani and surrounded completely by water, Nzulezu homes are gracefully poised on stilts, descending menacingly into the still waters below.
So it's 24 lanes in this community.
Okay.
And that means we're having 24 families. And then this is Nzulezu High Street.
Nzulezu High Street.
Yeah, this is the High Street.
Nzulezu is an Nzima word meaning surface of water. The inhabitants of the village are said to have migrated from Walata, a city in ancient Ghana Empire, the earliest of the Western Sudanese states. According to tradition, ancestors of the village were brought to their present place under the guidance of a snail. The serene ambience of the surrounding landscape, coupled with the general activities of 24 families, each occupying a stilt lane, point to a dynamic relationship between man and nature. In 2000, it was nominated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Nzulezu is a unique lacustrine habitation achieved by a harmony of forces of nature to meet man's need, resulting in a settlement of outstanding value. The precarious nature of the village's position and build is a far cry from that of its people. Quiet, almost solemn atmosphere is only broken by the occasional sound of a child's unreserved laughter or a cheeky dive into the water to cool off. Finally, to complement your exploration of tradition, history, and nature, a decadent dinner in the restaurant, or a cocktail on the beach deck, or perhaps a walk on the beach with a hazy sunset in the back, serenaded by Maha's tranquil waves, will set you up for a sound sleep. What a beautiful bridge between adventure and relaxation. Discover more of Ghana on Destination Africa. Visit theangelabamford.com for more.
Hello, Angela. Hi. My name is Eunice. My question is, how can young people be more abreast with socio-political issues in the more global Black context? Thank you.
I think the first place you find young people today is social media, right? I think we should use social media as a tool to create a community, because as you find it now, Africans don't see themselves to be, part of the global African community. We have the Africans in the diaspora, and then we have the Africans on the continent. But I think it starts with realizing that we have a common identity, a common history. Even though we went through different parts of that history, we still have that thing in common. So using social media as a tool to mobilize, to facilitate association, networking, and whatnot. I think that's where we can start from. We here at the Angela Bamford Show have a big announcement. The announcement is all season long, you stand a chance to win an all expenses paid trip to Nairobi, and Cape Town. Kind courtesy Copen Hospitality. Go to theangelabamford.com to find out how you can walk away with this prize.
Here is an exciting chance to win a defining experience to explore the East and South of Africa. Excited about the stunning landscapes of South Africa and the world-famous ranges of the Kenya Safari? You are in for a treat then. The Angela Bamford Show is giving away an all-expenses-paid trip to Cape Town and Nairobi, courtesy Copan Hospitality. Our lucky viewers stand a chance to enjoy a 6-night bed breakfast, a day tour of the picturesque Cape Town and Table Mountain. How about a boat cruise to Seal Island or an escape to the captivating winelands? Add a Kenyan safari and you are set for an exciting adventure. Head over to theangelabamford.com to find out how you can win. It's the Angela Bamford Show.
On this episode, a member of my audience stands a chance to win a $200 voucher to shop at Segbi Bogolan. DJ Akel, let's select. Let's give something away. Oh, I get to choose? Yeah. I get to choose? Yeah. Okay. Don't look. Who is the lucky winner? 12! All right, you have won a $200 voucher to shop at Segbi Bogolan. My beautiful shirt is by Segbi Bogolan. And the Pepper Band. And of course, we have in the house on the turntables DJ Akel. And of course, I can't forget my studio audience. Well, we've come to the end of this episode. My name is Angela Bamford. I'll see you next time. Good night.
All I want is one dance with you. Let the music take us to where it wants to